welcome back to Uncovered. Today we have a guest on and we're really excited. His name is Charlie Love.
Welcome to Uncovered.
Yes, welcome Charlie. This is our first male guest that we've ever had on our podcast. So we are really, really excited to explore a topic about males and pole dancing, something that maybe a lot of people haven't really seen much in the pole industry, depending on where you're from. So Charlie, how are you today?
I'm doing well, thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited. A little bit nervous, little bit giddy.
Yeah.
But yeah, feeling good.
That's standard.
That's normal. And like we do have our video on, guys, as well for our YouTube viewers. So if you want to come see Charlie's face and of course mine and Steph's.
Of course.
We're here and we're going to be recording all our episodes. But let's just get straight into it. So do you want to tell us a little bit about yourself and your background in pole and performing? Because you don't just do pole, is that right?
Yeah, so I was a bit of a theatre kid growing up. I always say that I was a fake theatre kid because I don't ever sit still long enough to read scripts.
What is a fake theatre kid?
So
Improv. All improv, right?
All improv, a lot of improv. But because I used to do acting classes outside of school through high school and stuff, and looked into that a little bit and then kind of dropped off soon after leaving school. But I started pole dancing when I was 23, I think. So I didn't have a background in any kind of dance or fitness or movement or that kind of stuff. Mostly out of fear. So when I was younger, I really wanted to get into dancing, but it was something that I was, as a boy, scared to do and scared to ask about. And then when I was 23, I moved to Canberra and I was bored out of my mind.
That sounds pretty standard, Canberra.
I was
Sorry, guys.
Sorry, Canberra. So I moved with my partner at the time, and he had friends there, but I didn't really know anyone there, and I felt kind of on the outside. And I was chatting to a friend about what I could do because I was so bored, and I'm like, but if I join a gym, I won't go. And she's like, try pole dancing. And I was like, okay, I'll give it a go. And so I went and did a trial class, and then I was doing 3 classes a week. And then I moved to Melbourne soon after and jumped back into another studio and was doing 5 classes a week, and then 7, and then 9, and then 12.
and then I just lived at the studio.
Yeah. I mean, look, I actually did live at a pole studio for a period of time. Yes.
Interesting.
So where did you grow up in state?
In Brisbane. So I grew up in Queensland.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so I grew up here, and then it was with my partner that I moved to Canberra very briefly, and then moved to Melbourne. So I was in Melbourne for 5 years, but the majority of my polling was down there. And then I started performing. So I've been polling all up for about 6.5 years, and I started competing, I think about 2 years in, maybe 18 months, 2 years in. And then just in the last year, I've started doing non-pole industry gigs. So I moved back to Brisbane right before the start of the pandemic, which was
was that planned?
No, it was just
well timed.
Yeah, a bit of a moving back home on short notice sort of thing, and then the pandemic hit, and I was quite lucky to be in a state that didn't, have a lot of cases. And so through that, I was able to get connected with some friends who work a lot in the drag and burlesque scenes. And then people started booking me for gigs, and
so
I love it. Yeah.
That's so good. So, and anyone that has seen Charlie's Instagram knows how freaking flexy his back and shoulders are. So did you, were you always flexy like that, or did you train, or was it a bit of both?
It's a natural flexibility. Yeah.
Wow. I think for male too. Sorry, I go wow because when I think of male pole dancers, I'm like they have to train really hard to get flexibility. But you already had a bit of.
I think it's like
flexi.
your signature moves has got all that shoulders and back stuff, which is just incredible. I say to people, when people are like, oh, my splits, I'm like, shoulders and back, I reckon that is a way more impressive, and what you can do with it's like so much more entertaining than just a split.
Oh yeah, and the thing, letting you in on a little secret, because I'm all about, selling yourself and showmanship and flaunting what you've got. I don't have a flat split on either side, and so I just don't do it. My hamstrings don't like it.
Yeah.
And so that's not what I do. That's why everything I do is a twist and a straddle, because I've got good spinal rotation, good shoulder mobility.
And I guess it's going off topic a little bit, but
Like, it gives me hope that maybe one day I just need to work on this flexibility.
well, but it's playing to your strengths, right? So
Yeah.
you don't have to be super, super flexy to be able to compete and do shows and gigs
Yep.
and all that sort of stuff. You have to play to your strengths and find what you like and what you're good at.
Oh
as
yeah,
well, so.
especially when I'm performing outside of the pole industry on a stage pole. It's like, I'll put on a good show, but I'm not putting my hardest tricks on that pole because
Yeah.
it's, it doesn't feel as secure as one that's fixed ceiling
Yeah.
to floor. Also, if I'm doing multiple gigs in a night or something, it's, you got to maintain your body. So you just put on the most impressive looking stuff.
And yeah, that's what I was going to say. You probably don't need to pull out the hardest looking tricks because you're not being judged on it.
Yeah.
And you, generally speaking, are not going to have like hardcore pole people in the crowd who's like, he just did a this instead of a this. Like,
Yeah.
they're just going to be impressed from like a Jamila,
Yeah.
essentially.
And we need to bring that back because I feel like pole at the moment is going towards just hardest. And it's like you look at it and you're like, well, I don't want to compete anymore because like people are throwing out rainbows and, all deadlifts like a friggin'
Miss Pole, what was there, like a spatchcock, a rainbow,
Fongie,
all
in
in
the
first two?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Oh,
ridiculous.
for Miss Pollitt's Queensland this year?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was wild. The
Yeah.
things that were like, so one of my core teachers in pole has been Amy Hazel.
Yeah.
And, Rainbow Machenko being one of her signature moves and that being like often the climax of her performances. And that was one of the things, it's like, she hit all of those points in the year that she won Miss Pole. And now people will throw Rainbow Machenko in the first 30 seconds. And it's like, okay, all right.
So what are you going to go do now?
Yeah, it's like, where does this go from here?
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think, so with your shows that you're doing that are the non-pole ones, how do you then create them? Like, what do you think? Do you create them in the same way you create a pole routine?
Absolutely not.
Okay. I'm just
Yeah.
interested because I'm like, for me with the pole stuff, like, and I don't love performing. Like, it's not a thing I absolutely love doing, but I'll put what tricks I want into the areas of the routine. Like, I'm not a super character sort of driven person. I'll pick a song that I like and I might maybe a style, and that's how I sort of do mine. But like, how do you do yours? How do you think of your shows and routines?
So something, and I've kind of always done it, but something that's really been reinforced since I've become more involved with drag performers and burlesque performers, for me, is about having like a bit in your performance. So it's like having a bit of a gag or a bit of a joke, whether it's, serious or not, but having something, whether it be a reveal or a character point or something that is a bit of a turning point in the performance that might make it funny or might make it intriguing and interesting and sort of changes the routine, if that makes sense. So many good drag performance, it'll be a costume reveal or a prop reveal, or maybe they've been, singing about a particular, someone that you would think would be the love of their life the whole time, and then they reveal it's actually a dildo, like that kind of stuff.
I love it.
And so having a bit of a bit
interesting.
that takes it to the next level, that's what keeps audiences interested. And from the burlesque side, it's more about really relishing in the tease of the strip, and it's taking it slow, because you watch some stunning burlesque performances and the entire thing will be minimal fluid sort of movement and the way that they remove items of clothing. So those have been two things I've really taken in. And so rather than being like, okay, well, I have to do dance and bass work and tricks and I'm only doing this so I can get to the other pole, it's really about relishing in each of those moments and creating those.
So true.
And so often I'll have a character in mind in my performances, even if it's not immediately apparent to the audience. It works for me to have that character development throughout it, which I think probably comes from my theatre background as well.
Yeah, definitely. I'm like, I feel like we got him on for the wrong thing, Renee. We should have got him on for like routine creation.
Yeah, I just thought that. I'm like, going off topic a bit, but it's like, with your success of doing all the gigs and stuff that you do, that's a really...
There'd definitely be, maybe we need to get you back on to do like a, how do you like position yourself into gig world for pole dancers, because I definitely think there'd be people out there listening who would be interested.
Well, because
if you're interested, guys, send us a DM.
Yeah, because some people, like, I never thought that Brisbane at all was a sort of gig city.
Yeah.
like for polars or for performers at all, because I was like, no, that would be Melbourne and Sydney, and then overseas there would be stuff that you could do. But I was like, nah, because when I first started, a few years in, people are like, oh, you're going to do performances, like paid performances. I'm like, no, we do competitions. They're not paid. We have to pay to do them. Like it's rip off. Yeah. But like, I just never thought that was a thing for Brisbane. But then I have seen more and more, and I'm like, hang on a second, there is this huge, performance sort of vibe.
There's so much on in Brisbane. So, the 5 years, and again, I wasn't particularly involved in performing or anything before I moved away, but the 5 years that I was in Melbourne and then when I came back, it really seems like the city has grown so much. Yes. So when I had left Brisbane, I was like, I feel like I've outgrown it. There's not much here for me, but there's this entire world of performance that really managed to thrive through lockdowns and through the world shutting down. And, yes, we have been kind of secluded in being stuck here by ourselves, but across burlesque, drag, live music, dance, there's something on every night of the week, which is not something I would ever expect to have seen in the past.
Yeah, I think Brisbane has definitely matured. Even the options for food in the last couple of years has just blown up. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the kitchens still close at 8:30 at night.
Oh, I know, yeah. It's like, I just want a burger, or I just want something. And it's like Saturday night and everything shuts. Like,
yeah. So going back to pole dance, so what was it like for you, I guess, as a male pole dancer first starting pole in Canberra, and I guess your experience in Melbourne as well?
So I think like overall I've been quite lucky. I mean, that's kind of me anyway. And I think I come into a lot of things with a lot of privilege as someone who is a white male. But I think that's kind of been, part of my personality in my whole life as well, has been I tend to connect with people pretty easily. So I often will be accepted into different groups. One big thing that I did notice when I first started pole was there were a lot less studios that allowed men to come in and train, and it wasn't something that a lot of studios had actually faced before as an issue. And so when I was reaching out to studios and I was asking, a lot of them were like, oh, this is, maybe the first, second or third time that we've been asked, so it hasn't been something before. And it was quite easy for people to be like, oh, no, we don't cater to men, and that's fine. And I'm very respectful of studios that are non-male studios, especially considering what we're doing and what we're wearing and the kind of activity and the fact that it comes from a stripping background and all of those kinds of things. It's like I'm very respectful of that. But yeah, initially I struggled to find a studio that I could go to as a male polar. At the very first studio that I stepped into, I also found that because they had the men's class separate from the rest of the classes, I didn't really learn things in a I suppose in a structured way to begin with.
Like in a chronological
sense. Yeah. So the first thing that I did in my trial, I think I did like a pencil spin or something, and she was like, okay, you're strong enough. So the second thing that I did in my trial was an outside leg hang.
Zero time. And I was going to say that's like, and one of our questions is around like, what do you guys find easier? And generally strength is like, and that's a stereotype, but generally strength is the thing that guys have.
But yeah, I'm very interested. I know, especially from like my strength and conditioning background, males and females obviously differ like quite significantly, like biologically. So it's like, most of the pole studios, if not like I would say 99% curriculums are all suited to like females and their progression, because it is a lot slower. So males might be able to progress quicker, but then they might not. Like I just don't know. Like how did you find in terms of?
Well, yeah, I found that I was learning intermediate to advanced stuff straight up, and it meant that I later injured myself because I didn't know how to straddle properly, and I wouldn't straddle. Like the first thing I learnt was an outside leg hang, so that was jumping to hook my outside leg. That wasn't straddling and then hooking my outside leg on.
It wasn't controlled. You didn't have essentially those foundational movements to get you in there.
Yeah, absolutely that. And so and then and then when I'd been polling for like a year and a half, and I was at I'd been at so I've trained at Blackbird in Melbourne for most of my career. And when I was at that studio, a year having been there, and they're like, okay, and then we're going to do an inside leg turn, and I was like, a what? Just like a hook and spin around the pole. I'm like, I don't. How do I do this?
They're like,
what is this advanced technique that I haven't learned?
That's crazy.
Yeah, but it is how I came into dance in pole, because again, like even at, 23, 24 years old, when I was so I came out as gay when I was 15, and I was, very proudly and openly gay for a long time, but still at 23, 24 years old, I had a fear of dancing. So for the first year, maybe 18 months of pole, I didn't do any dance classes. I only did tricks, and I was like, no, and I think again, that was my, my fear of, my own masculinity or lack of masculinity,
Putting
or whatever it was
yourself
at the
out
time.
there.
And so I was like, no, I do pole dancing, but I do tricks, and I do it to be strong, and I look strong doing it, all that kind of stuff.
Sounds
And
like me when I started.
I was gonna say, I'm like, you definitely hear that, like
Yeah.
a lot. Even females and males, I can imagine, they don't want to sell themselves as, or they don't want to present themselves as the sexy side of pole
Yeah.
straight away. It's all like, it's for fitness, it's for this. Yeah.
And I had this fear of movement, both in terms of coming across as feminine, which was an issue that I've since dealt with, but also a fear of being looked at in learning how to dance. And because I stepped into pole and I was jumping straight into outside leg hangs and inverting, and I was like, oh, but if I step into dance and I don't, what if I'm not good and everyone looks at me?
Yeah, and then they judge me, and then I know I can't move very well, but you need to take that time to learn to move. Yeah, and
it was only because I injured myself. So it was I'm sure maybe Simone spoke about this on your pole physio.
Did she?
On your apostle, not about me, but I mean like common injuries and stuff.
Oh yeah.
But I was getting like shooting pains up the side of my spine on like when I was doing inverts.
Yeah.
Like in the I don't know, I don't want to name body parts, scap something. Let's call it that.
Yeah.
Scapula?
Yeah.
I was like,
in
look
my
at Renee for those
spatula.
ones.
my spatula was hurting when I was inverting.
And I think most people be like, yeah, I know where that is.
Yeah, I got the spatula just here.
So like in the muscles down the outside of my back when I was inverting, I was getting shooting pains, and that was because I hadn't developed those smaller muscles. And so I was advised to just do physio rehab and take time off pole, and that's when I started dancing. And so that was because I wanted to keep my fitness up, and that's when I really fell in love with the movement.
So how
side of
long
it.
did you find until you felt comfortable in that dance space?
Oh, that's tough. Like I loved it straight away. I was still like shitting myself for a lot of it. So so the same as I stepped into like an intermediate advanced tricks level of pole, my first pole dance teacher was Fontaine Bradbury.
Wow.
And I was like, and again, it was because that was the night of the week that a class was on, and so I was going to her class, and there weren't any class levels. It was just she would come in and teach the choreography that she wanted to teach, and everyone was open and welcome to do it, as long as you were happy to show up and do what you could.
Yeah.
And so when I first started, I was wearing like leggings and socks and knee pads, and I was maybe hitting every 8th move, and it was just scrambling around the pole, and she had flips and twists and all these sorts of things, and I loved it, but I was terrified at the same time.
Yeah.
So I was like, nobody look at me, but I'm really enjoying moving.
Yeah.
And then I didn't put heels on for about 6 months of dancing. And again, I think that was that fear of, that real reservedness of, what if I'm no good in heels? What if I look like a fool in heels? What if I look tacky and embarrassing and all those kinds of things? And then I put heels on and I'm like, oh, okay. And for ages, Fontaine was telling me, if you, it's like once you put heels on, it'll change your dancing. It'll really improve how you dance in this kind of style. And she was right.
And that is so surprising, knowing you, and anyone else that knows you would be like, no way. Like he's a natural dancer, natural at that. So and it goes to show like people work hard. Like Charlie's worked really, really hard at that. And you see him when he does his performances. It's like, I remember you did one recently and you were like, oh, I'm nervous before I go on. And I'm like, what? You get nervous?
Yeah, every time. And that was just at like an in-studio comp. And I think it's even worse there because if I'm performing for a bunch of drunk people at 1 a.m. all I have to do is go upside down and they can love it. Whereas when I'm performing for, my students and peers, it's like
expectations.
Yeah, all of the feedback that I give them, they're going to be looking at and be like, oh, wow, I see your feet are sickled in this. What are you doing there?
No, I feel that too, definitely. We've got a student showcase coming up and I'm performing in it and I am just like, oh my God, what am I going to do? Because I was like, no, like I've got so much going on in my life. I'll just put something together just to get me up there. But then I'm like, I know that pressure and expectation on myself will try and make me do like, oh no, you got to do a deadlift or maybe put a fongie in there. Like, but then I'm just like, it's like what everyone else is going to expect.
Yes.
Yeah.
You try to meet the expectations of what you think your students expect of you.
Yeah.
But they just want to see you dance essentially.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And move and show what you got. But
Yeah.
Meanwhile, whenever I'm here giving advice to people, I'm like, just have fun on stage, enjoy yourself. If you're not enjoying it, then why are you doing it? And people are going to tell that you don't want to be there. Yeah. Whereas we're here like, oh God, we've got to just do the best thing. We can't possibly have fun on stage. We can't do what we want to do. We've got to do what they expect us to do.
Say, not what we do.
Yes.
Nah, it is. I think it is a big thing. Is like at the end of it, I know I always enjoy it after, but we do go through struggles that everyone puts their expectations on themselves. And like I said before, like I don't love performing so much. I don't do it a lot. I don't love competing, but I do like to put myself out of my comfort zone and do that as well. I'm reading a really great book at the moment called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway.
Oh, how is that going?
So far, so good. I'm up to like chapter 4.
She's only on the fear so far. So she's just been feeling fear.
I'm just identifying all my fears and I'm like, oh my God, I've got a lot of fears.
I've developed severe anxiety.
Since seeing this now, I have it. But I think that, putting yourself out of the comfort zone and just kind of realizing that one of the biggest things that they say is everyone else is in the same boat.
Oh,
yeah, 100%.
So, like, you know, some people, there might be the anonymous, oh God, I can't say that word.
Anonymous.
Come on, Charles.
No.
Outliers. Let's use the word outliers.
Yeah,
Anomaly? Is that the word that you're after? Okay.
That just absolutely love it and naturals at it. But most of the time for people, it is just, you know, it's really hard.
Oh,
well, I just
yourself
think
out
about
there.
your story of like your first class and you're like, I loved it, but I thought like I was shitting myself and I felt like this. I've seen so many women come through our studio and do one class and feel like that and then never come back because they're just not. They're like, I'm not ready to put myself back in that uncomfortable
And a
zone
lot of
yet.
that comes down to like the stereotypes and stigmas in society
100%.
as well. I think we have to recognize. Did you find that you felt different in like different states, or have you been to other countries and done pole?
Where have I done pole? I've polled, I think, in most states. So I mean, I've done it definitely in Melbourne, a little bit in Canberra, a little bit in Sydney. And a lot in Brisbane. I've also briefly visited Perth and Adelaide. I was lucky enough that when I was visiting Perth and Adelaide, I was already established and I was friends with studio owners, and so I would come in and I would be welcomed immediately. And so any students who came in, because I'd be sitting there as friends with the studio owner, I would be welcomed. Not that I would expect anything different, but it's that that comfort of having that connection already. Yes, there's definitely a lot of difference state to state. So I feel like for a long time, Melbourne has been almost like these. I'm trying to think of a non-appropriative word. I'm like Mecca, no. Holy Lands, no. I don't know. But like just this. Oh, I can only think of religious-based things, but like it's like this valley of the gods is all of the competitive female pole dancers living in Melbourne, and I know that Miss Pole Dance Victoria is really highly contested, and so many of the Miss Pole Dance Australia champions are Melbourne-based, and so that really trickles down into the studio culture. And so there's a real strong expectation of performance and competition at studios in Melbourne. And there's plenty of people who don't compete, and there's plenty of people who are welcome to come and do classes and don't compete. But it's like, if you've been polling for a year, inevitably you're going to be asked, when are you going to perform? When are you going to compete? What competitions are you doing this year? And that really, I think, is sort of part of what pushes the drive of the industry down there, and how it is very much focused on your ability and performance. Whereas in Brisbane, when I moved here, coming from that, it was a bit of culture shock and realizing that there are so many awesome polers here who have no desire to perform or compete. And that surprises me, actually, when you said that you don't enjoy performing so much. I was like, but you get attention. I don't understand. I don't understand why you wouldn't want attention.
I guess that is how when you first started, the studio I first started at, there was a few people, like the higher level girls, that were just starting to do some competitions. But there was like in Brisbane, it's like I always used to say, when somebody had said to me, even when I did QBC and I was in the professional division, everyone's like, oh wow, professional. I'm like, but professional here is not like professional. I'm like more semi-pro. When I first was doing like Miss Pole and professional, I'm like, no, I would really be semi-pro if you take into consideration like, the people in Melbourne and even Sydney. So I felt like, that the standard, like Brisbane, we've always said like we love the community up here because everyone's really friends with each other, and we do like the studio jams and stuff like that we've already started trying to organise more next year, that we just get all the instructors. All the instructors to come together from different studios and just hang out, and at competitions it feels so supportive and friendly because it's like catching up with friends. It doesn't feel super
and I think
competitive.
in Brisbane, I don't know much about the other states, but I feel like in Brisbane it's because we started with such a couple, and then students from there became owners, and then but they still kept all those connections. So a lot of them are very close still.
Yeah. Whereas when I was in Melbourne, and I looked it up on a pole directory back when Australian Pole Dancers magazine was still a thing, and there were 50 pole studios in the state of Victoria, which like compared to, and like, you know, there would be one in almost like every other suburb sort of thing, and so you'd never be more than 15 minutes from a pole studio.
And I guess the thing is that they're then real competitors, whereas here, like it's starting to get more dense, but everyone was spread out enough that it's like you're not competing with each other because you've got your own little geographical areas, so that everyone was pretty happy.
And I think until you get to an advanced level, you're going to go to whatever is closest, right? Like you're going to Google pole studios near me.
Yeah.
And it's going to pop up the one that is closest to you, and you're probably going to go to that unless you know somebody in the industry or something along those lines.
I think that was a point of difference for me as a male stepping into the pole dance world, was when I moved from Canberra to Melbourne, and I should have been a beginner, but I was looking up pole dance studios because it was the first time in my life, and I've only been doing it for 6 months, but it was the first time in my life that I'd committed to something that was fitness focused, that I was really enjoying, and I was like, if I don't pick this up straight away, then I'm going to drop it. And so I was looking up pole studios, and I was living in Werribee, which is like geographically the Ipswich of Melbourne. So like, you know, the outer western suburbs, and Blackbird is in, I guess, the inner east, semi-outer east of Melbourne. And so I was driving in traffic about an hour and a half each way to go to Blackbird because, one, it was recommended, it had just opened up, and it was recommended by one of my teachers in Canberra as a studio to go to. And two, it was one of the few studios at the time, so 2015, that had open mixed classes and didn't just have men's classes or, didn't allow males. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. And I guess that would be the biggest difference for you, especially back then, is like you were a little bit more limited to what you could do, where you could go.
Because I guess it's that and you want to feel inclusive and a part of the studio, because that's what's so important about them, right? Is community. Well, at least for what I am aware of. And I know we've talked about this because we're female only, and we're like, do we just run a men's class? And then I'm like, but then I have to have a completely different pricing for them. And then what if they feel like they can't, because they can't go to everything else that we have? And I'm like, and then it just was like, I don't know how to settle this, but it is. And
I think it's still like we were saying that, like, since obviously a lot of people have come so far from since 2015. Yeah. But some of the, we don't really get many males that are interested. We have a bunch of males that train at our studio outside of the general class hours. So it's not that they can't come and train. And obviously you've been to the studio as well. But it is one of those challenges that it's like, hey, you want to include everyone. But then there's also obviously like, was it Fernwood Fitness, and there's female only gyms and all that sort of stuff. So it's like, where's the...
Yeah, I've had to do a lot of research in it to understand where we stand. But I literally had students who, and like we touched on before, like the nature of what we're doing, and the link to strippers, and the link to how we present ourselves in studio, and the little clothing we're wearing. It's like, I've had people who are like, I would not come if you had men here. And I'm like, cool, well, if I'm going to lose business, like the market, like from a business perspective, and I hope this doesn't come across wrong, but from a business perspective, the market's just not there for me to shift. So it's challenging.
But it's not your responsibility. Thank
you. You know how much I'm stressed over this in the last 18 months. I'm like, what do I do?
Yeah. So I think, we are living in a capitalist society, so you do have to run your business. And I think this is something that I've always struggled with is the pole industry in general, how most studios are a labor of love and tend not to run at any kind of profit. And so if it's not something that's going to be profitable for you, or if it's negatively going to impact your business, you know, for your business, like that doesn't make any sense to do that. But also, again, working in an industry that is built off the foundations that are set by sex workers and strippers, there's always been a divide in gender there, and a divide around safety. And a lot of it is about, you know, making sure that women who are coming into this space do feel safe and empowered and are gaining things from it rather than coming in and losing things. And, you know, there's plenty of studios around that do offer classes for men.
And that's what if we get inquiries, I just refer them to all the co-ed studios in Brisbane. I'm like, I don't know where you're based, but here's the ones that I'm aware of. Yeah. Go check one of these ones out.
You know, if you know, your studio or you had a chain of studios that was massively profitable and you had a monopoly on Brisbane, well then, okay, you should probably be looking into that sort of thing. But if this is, you know, the history of your studio and what it has built as your culture, I don't think there's any responsibility there for you to have to do that. And you're already referring people to other businesses as well. It's not like you're gatekeeping pole from...
And offering the option of private lessons or studio hire as well if they couldn't go anywhere.
Because I want and I'm a firm believer of I don't care where people pole as long as they're polling. If they decide that they don't want to pole with us anymore and they want to go to old mate over there, then that's fine as long as they're still polling, because it benefits me in the long run anyway.
Absolutely. Yeah.
It's important to have as many people in it because it's only going to boost every single other pole business that exists. So, and
the more you build the community, the stronger your business will become. Which is why I've never really understood the divide that some studios have where, and I think, you know, part of it is brand identity and feeling like people are carving their place out in the industry. But you see so many studios who will go and rename every trick in the book that has a universal or fairly universal name. And I see that as something that's quite restrictive for their students, because then when students come from another studio to there, or they leave that studio and go somewhere else, they don't feel like it's accessible to them, because if they don't have the same language, it's like, oh, you know, well, I don't know a Jamila as a Jamila or a Jade as a Jade. I mean, two examples of the same person. But if they don't have that, then pole isn't accessible to them, and it only benefits every business to continue to grow the pole community.
Yeah, and because pole's not really regulated, the tricks, there are some tricks that are called the same thing, but then people will make new tricks up or new names for old tricks, or be like, oh, okay. And obviously combination of tricks and then all this new stuff that's created, it's like, how can you just name everything?
Just a comment on pole lols last night about the hashtag PD beginner.
Yeah, I saw that one.
I've never actually commented on any of them, but I did. I'm like, this is really hard because the industry isn't regulated, and what is, you know, a beginner, a Superman from a floor in one studio is considered beginner. It might be intermediate over here, or an invert, like where they sit. I'm like, and then you've got social media on top of that. It's a beast in itself, so you can't restrict people. It's freedom of speech. And then, so all we can do as a community is our best to educate our own studio and our own students, and try to keep it as consistent as we can.
I was going to say, a podcast we recently recorded with just me and Steph about the business side of things we were like, about your demographic, and it's like, you know, where you are in terms of like, there's some studios that are known to train elite performers or like people that compete and whatnot, so their standard is going to be quite high, so their probably curriculum is going to be pushed up quite high as well. So what you're doing as a beginner, you're learning to invert and go upside down, whereas other studios that are more for like fun fitness is like, okay, you know, you're not inverting until you're at least intermediate and you've been able to display XYZ over a certain amount of, you know, time and stuff like that. So you can't, like, there's no universal.
Oh, absolutely. And it's all about serving the people that you want to maintain at your studio. So if it's about people who are polling socially, they're going to want some challenges, but they're going to want some wins in every lesson, otherwise they're not going to come back. Whereas if they are those more advanced competitive pollers, they're going to want to be feeling challenged and really like they're thriving.
Yeah, and really being like pushing through the levels, because their goal is being an advanced pole dancer. So how quickly can they get there?
An advanced pole dancer used to be a Jade split, and you're an advanced pole dancer. So and everyone was satisfied with that, because they were like, it was more the mindset thing than anything. And I know some studios have gone away from the beginner, intermediate, advanced, and have done like levels 1, 2, or you know, like they've called it something different. And I don't know whether that's because of a mindset thing or...
I would say so.
If it helps.
Psychologically, like you don't want to be a beginner. Well,
Because
sorry, beginners. But like it does then make you look at it from a like advanced is the top. But I guess it's the same with numbers. Like,
but then you could do 1, 2, 3. Level 1 is the first, level 2, and then 3 is advanced. But then you could also do 3, 2, 1. Like number 1's usually the best. Do you know what I mean? Because
we
when
just
you win
opened
a
up a
race,
can of worms.
Just make all of the students stand on a podium at the end of the day and be like, sorry, you're a 3 today.
3, a 1, or maybe a 1.5, or yeah. Actually, we used to. My first studio I started, we introduced a level 3.5.
Yeah, that was the inverting, like learning to invert.
Yeah. But yeah. So what was your reactions from people when, I guess, in your Muggle world or Muggle life, when you told them
Great
that
question.
you're a pole dancer, or did it take you a while to say that?
Sometimes it still takes me a while.
Would you say that like most of your work is in pole now, or you're still?
It's getting close to 50-50. So I do have a day job that I work part-time, and something when I moved back to Brisbane 2 years ago now I burnt myself out working full-time and polling full-time. So I think I did, it might have been like 5 competitions in 7 or 8 weeks or something.
What? I don't think I've done 5 competitions in my life.
Yeah, that sounds right. So it was when I was competing with my best friend Andrew James Lewin. We were doing double stuff, and so we did pole theatre, and then we did pole theatre. Then 3 weeks later we did Felix Cane Pole Championships, and then I think 2 weeks later I did APC, and then a week after that I did Frisk, or vice versa, something like that.
Wow.
So we had a lot of competitions. Maybe there was another one. I don't know. There was a lot of competitions jammed into a very short time frame, which was great for me in allowing myself to develop, a competition performance in a short period of time. But while also, trying to maintain full-time work and living and training and all of that sort of stuff, it really burnt me out.
As well. What is that when you have all that going on?
And for a long time I had this mentality of taking away from any of my training was negative progress. Like I had this assumption that, and because I had gone from 1 to 3 to 5 to 7 to 9 to 12 classes a week, I was like, if I do less than 12 classes a week, I'm going to go backwards. Even when I was training, for like after classes from 9:30 until midnight every night to do competitions and that kind of stuff. And it just burnt me out. And so it really sort of blew my mind going through lockdowns, not being able to train, and then getting back on the pole and being like, I can still lift myself. Like that's still a thing that I can do. So when I moved back to Brisbane, I made a very conscious decision to step into part-time work. And I was like, I'll just change my lifestyle in terms of how I spend money so I can minimize costs that way, and I'm so much happier doing that, which has been a real benefit for me. But about half my income now is from pole, like teaching and performance, which is something that I never thought would be a possibility for me, so that's really great.
It's amazing.
But still, so I'm now working in so I lost a job in the last lockdown that we had, and I've just stepped into another role, but it's easy hours at work for me. It's a job that I can leave at work, and I don't think I've told any of them that I'm a pole dancer. And a lot of that is because I've got my Muggle name and my pole name. And I'm like, I don't want them following me on social media.
I have 2 separate accounts as well, and I know that with my other work, like most people know that I'm a pole dancer. But like they don't have my pole account either because, and I don't know, it's still like we did an episode on.
Yeah, we did an episode. Should I tell the people I work with I'm a pole dancer? So.
But I feel like there are a lot of people. Some people are just like, don't care, and then some people are like, oh no, I'm pretty established, but I'm still like, just like it's my life. I can kind of decide what I want to do, and I feel like that too.
I remember. I don't know if I said this in the story, but I remember we were hosting an event, and the CEO of the bank was there, and it had the 2 truths and 1 lie. So I put, I'm a pole dancer, because it's pretty well known. I'd been there for a long time. And he comes up and he's just reading it and he's like, is this true? Is that what the lie? And I'm like, shit.
You're like, why did I do that?
This is the CEO. I'm like, fuck. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, well, just putting it out there. That's who I am. That's what I do.
Because some people will just judge. Like, you don't get a chance. Like, people will just see, like, what they want to see. And I know that my boss at my other job, like, I'd been working there for probably, like, 3-4 years. And, like, everyone knew. Because I told people, like, on the first couple of days that I was working there, just, like, people that were more around my age and more that I sort of vibed with. And then, a couple of years in, he's like, oh, Renee. And because he's like a middle-aged or like middle-aged, late age, whatever man.
Late age. He's on his last legs.
And he's from India as well. So he's like, I was like, wasn't sure how he would react to that. And he was just like, oh, I heard you do pole. And I was like, yeah, like I've been doing it for ages. And he's like, oh, so strong. Like, well done. Like that stuff is crazy. Like, oh, we should have a push-up competition. I was like, I don't really do push-ups. I'm like, I'll do a handstand. But like I've had so much support, and this is from like human services, like social work industry, which is good to know that. But I also thought that they might be like, oh no, you can't be doing that. And this isn't it like contradicting, like, you know, but it was a really good organization, really supportive and accepting no matter what.
So I think in my current role, the reason that I haven't told a lot of people is actually just to maintain boundaries. Yeah. So it's not out of shame of what I do, because I love what I do and I love to flaunt it. But if I open up that boundary, I'm like, oh, then they're going to want to hang out, and they're going to ask me about it. And I'm like, and then I'm going to have to go to their like kid's christening or something. I'm like, I don't have time for that. I'm busy. Whereas in my old work, and the whole reason that I came up with my stage, I feel like I'm like revealing a big secret, because so many people just believe that my pole name is my birth name. And I respond to both fairly equally now, again, because I know so many people through performing. But the reason that I came up with my stage name was because I was working in disability employment services at the time that I was going to start competing, and I wanted to keep my Instagram public. And formerly, my Instagram name was just my full first and last name. But I was wanting to put pole stuff on there, and I worked with a caseload of 40 to 50 clients, and a lot of them were part of the LGBT community as well. And so there were already some overlaps in that. And my concern wasn't about being seen, but more so about them coming into an appointment and being like, oh, I found this video of you, I found this photo of you, and them pushing it in a way that I'm like, oh, that's, you know, like client.
You just feel like
boundaries.
You can't maintain that professionality in those situations. That's fair enough.
That's such a good point, because at the end of the day, sometimes work is work. And I know that people that obviously work full time, that's a huge chunk of their life. So they do involve a lot more of their personal life in work. But some people, and I'm similar to that with my other job, I'm like, I just kind of want to keep this as work. Like, I like you guys a lot. Like, we have gone out a few times, but at the end of the day, I'm like, you're not really my friends. I kind of am just happy to keep you as work colleagues.
And I find the struggle in pole then in the other way. It's like I try to keep part of my life to myself, but I feel like when you're full time in pole, it's a little bit more difficult. So
the personal life.
And it's like, you know, and for so many people, even if you've been polling for a long time, if you're working on more advanced stuff, it can be the most vulnerable part of your day. And so when you're already there wearing not a lot of clothing, if you're doing strength-based stuff or difficult choreography, it's very easy to read someone and be like, oh, you're not having a good day. What's going on there? And so more often you get people asking about what's happening in your life.
Yes. And we share a lot about our lives, and we hear a lot about their lives. So boundaries crossed everywhere.
Yeah, that's so true. I was going to say something, but I won't.
I see, the thing is I talk a lot, so I know that we're already going a bit long here. But
no, we're fine.
So there was a point that you made before about stepping into competition and performing. And so a point that I wanted to make about that in relation to being a male pole dancer was, I think, something that really boosted me performance-wise quite early on was that I left competition at the door. So for every time I've competed, there's been a couple of times where I've been like, oh, you know, I would like to place if that's possible. But as a male pole dancer, one of my first ever competitions was Mr. Pole Dance International. And at that time, borders were open, so it was international, and they only had one category, which was professional. And so it meant that the first year that I was competing against Chris Talbot, or, you know, Blue Phoenix, and Adam Lynn, Lennox. I don't know if you know Lennox Moon. Like all of these stunning performers. And I was just aware that because there were so few men competing in the pole world, the range of competitors in terms of skill level was so much more broad. So I was there essentially as like a beginner intermediate performer, competing against full professional performers who had won this title multiple times against international. I think about half of them at the time were international competitors. And so that made it really easy for me to just enjoy the performance, because I'm like, well, I'm not even gonna place. Like, it's, they could do their, like, and that wasn't talking myself down. It's like, my skill's just not there.
There is the reality of, hang on a second, who am I up against? Like, do I have a chance in terms of, being able to place, and is that what I'm aiming for?
Yeah. And so it made it really easy for me in that competition and every competition following it. And also the reason that I competed was always to perform anyway, but it made it really easy for me to just make that decision that I want to have fun. I want to put on a good show. I want the audience to feel engaged with what I'm doing. And I don't really care about criteria. And I'll still look at different competitions that I do and, try and fit the vibe of the competition or the criteria. If it's more tricks focused, if it's more dance focused, if it's more character focused, that kind of stuff. But I still really do it for me and making those decisions that way.
Do you also find, because the pool of competitors is so much smaller, that you don't necessarily want to go in so competitive because you might not want to ruin those relationships?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm like that anyway. I'm like the
Let's
chick
just all
from
be
Mean
friends.
Girls. I wish we could all get along like we did in middle school. Just bake a cake filled with feelings. Like that's very me in any competitive situation. And I mean, like, unless it were literally life or death, I can't think of a competitive situation where I would be, trying to pressure other people into not having a good time. And in so much of what we do, it's pageantry anyway, so it's all about the audience and the audience's experience. And it's like, well, if we're all shitting on each other, it's not going to be a good experience for the audience.
It's not like there's massive prizes of
Oh,
money,
goodness,
or
no.
like most of it you don't even get any. Like, you get some sponsors stuff and a sash and some bragging rights. But
It's like, what did you win?
What is at
Debt.
stake? Yeah, I've spent all this money.
Yeah.
Anyway, like, to sort of wrap up, I guess, is there anything that you would change about the industry if you could, in terms of from a male perspective, or where do you think it's going? Or I don't know. I haven't really worded that question very amazingly.
No, that's fine. From a male perspective, I don't think so much. I mean, like, it may be ignorant for me to say this, but I feel like we've shifted into a place where, like, in my experience, in the established pole world, gender's taken out of it a lot more. And I'm still very much aware of gender and how that plays a role in how people might feel and in interactions and in privileges and that kind of stuff. I'm very much aware of that. But just the shift of where it used to be compared to, like, how so many more competitions are mixed now. So looking at Australia, I can only think of, like, there's Miss Pole, Mr. Pole, and then I think APC maybe are the gendered competitions where they have different categories, whereas the rest is mixed. And a lot of it is because Australia isn't so much athletic competitive polling, it's performance competitive polling. And so it's about putting on a show, and it's not like, oh, well, the men are going to win because they have better body strength. It's like, if they can't point their toes and they can't create a vibe, then it's not it.
That's a really good point, actually. I never thought about it in that way.
Yeah. And so it's like, it doesn't have to be the hardest tricks. It has, because tricks play a heavy role in a lot of things. And it's like, but if you're not performing well, it's not that great to watch. So I'm off the top of my head, not so much from a male perspective. The biggest thing that I would like to see, and it's hard because it's kind of an oxymoron, is a shift towards accessibility of pole, but also it being financially viable for it to continue. Because like I said before, so many businesses are run as a labor of love. And then, like, the same with competitions, like, when you are a competitive poler, it's something that you sink money into because you have the money to sink into as a passion. Like, you don't win money from that sort of stuff. You spend your money on traveling and accommodation and training and costumes and entry fees.
And entry fees for the competition, who pays for the poles and the lighting and the photography. And it's, and I don't think anyone's really running competitions and making a killing off them because the rigging for poles to set up is so expensive. And that's why, tickets to go and see a pole competition are so much more expensive. And so I'd really like to see that balance out a bit, because it's so hard watching so many studios struggle just, from class to class or day to day, while at the same time not being able to pay the highest wages for instructors. And I know that comparatively, I think pole is ranked pretty low compared to other, like, fitness instructors in, like, people working in the fitness industry in that way. Especially the specialized skills that you have to teach pole as well.
So I'd like to see it, again, living in a capitalist society, become more financially viable. And I think part of that is that pole should be, because you're limited to numbers by how many poles you've got, and it's expensive to set up a pole studio. But your pole should be a luxury sport, but it doesn't necessarily have a particularly wealthy clientele. So and you want it to be accessible to everyone, which is what I'd also love to see as well. And it's it sometimes feels a bit elitist, being like, oh, come and do my pole class for $42 a class.
Yeah.
Come and hang out with me for $42 an hour. And it's like, and that feels expensive to say for one fitness class, but I guess really that's where the clientele should be. But I haven't given a solution for you there. I've just given you two problems.
We talked about this in the episode we did about business, and because the question was around profit, and I'm like, I'm not going to dive into profit because there's so many complexities in there, but one of them is, are you priced appropriately? Because I would say that the bulk of the studios out there are not. And until we can come together, I guess, and agree on what is good and how we can push this up, then you're going to have to keep not necessarily pricing yourself appropriately, because you've got to remain competitive as well. So there's that huge balance. But yeah, I agree. I would love to do more development for my team, pay them more because they're great, but it becomes really hard when your clientele aren't necessarily the luxury clientele.
And the
love
fact
my
that
clientele.
no one's going to be able to buy a house anymore.
Yeah. But yeah,
We could all just rent pole studios and live in them.
Yeah.
we could throw you a bed on top of the upstairs if you
Done.
like.
Done.
Be nice and warm up there.